Today's session covers two important topics. The first one is the intrinsic semiconductors, and the second one is the extrinsic semiconductors. What are intrinsic semiconductors and what are extrinsic semiconductors? And the second portion of the or second session of the discussion will be mainly on the PN junction diode, how it is constructed, and what are the features of PN junction diode, what are the characteristic behaviors, both the forward characteristic and reverse characteristic, and some of the aspects regarding the different kinds of breakdown occurring in PN junctions. Okay, so let's start the session. Semiconductors, intrinsic and extrinsic type, and this is the fourth module we have already started. And in that particular fourth module, this is the sixth session which discuss about the semiconductors, in which we will discuss about intrinsic and extrinsic semiconductors. Okay. So before that one, we have to know the general aspects of atomic structures in a solid material. To understand conductors, semiconductors, or insulators, we need to know the band theory of solids. Of course, you might have learned all these things in your high school class and higher secondary classes. But for the knowledge of the intrinsic and extrinsic semiconductors, we will just discuss about some of the aspects of this band theory. And from that onwards, we will be discussing about the intrinsic semiconductors and extrinsic semiconductors. Okay. What are the fundamental units of any solid? Any solid material, the fundamental unit is actually the atom. Every materials are composed of atoms, and many atoms are composed with, when many atoms are combined together, we say that it is made up of so much of molecules together, isn't it? So atom means the atom consists of nucleus, which includes neutrons and protons and electrons. Okay. So number of electrons will be always equal to the number of protons, and the entire atom is electrically neutral. So in any atom, the number of electrons which revolves around the nucleus will be always equal to the number of protons. Okay, this basic theory you know. So this is the nucleus, and around which actually these are all orbits, and through these orbits the electrons are revolving. Actually, this is the nucleus. Central core is the nucleus, around which this orbital structures or orbits are there. These electrons are actually orbiting around the nucleus. Okay, so actually nucleus consists of what? Protons, positive charged protons, and neutrons. That's why the nucleus has got a net charge of positive, isn't it? So electrons are actually negatively charged particles. That we know. Now, electrons are arranged in different orbits or shells like this, isn't it? This is the first orbit having 2 electrons, then second orbit having 8 electrons, third orbit having 18 electrons, like that. And that actually depends upon the theory. Number of electrons in nth shell of any atom is equal to 2 n square, where n is the number of orbits, that you know. The electrons present in the outermost shell are called what? That are called the valence electrons. So the valence electrons are the outermost shell electrons of the atom. Depending on the number of valence electrons, elements are classified into different groups. So depending upon the number of valence electrons. So if valence electrons mean the electrons which are available on the valence band. And what are the basic characteristics or the specific features of these electrons? In the valence band, there will be a large number of free electrons available. This free electrons will be moving in the valence band in the haphazard manner, having no specific directions or anything like that. Okay. So these free electrons, depending upon the number of electrons available on the valence band, the elements are classified into different groups. So we will first see what are these orbital structure, or what are these levels called, that is energy levels. An isolated atom has certain number of orbits, what we have, I have just told you now. So this is the first orbit having 2 numbers of electrons, like that. The first orbit, second orbit, third orbit, fourth orbit, fifth orbit, like that. So each orbit has got its own levels of energy. Each orbit is fixed and it has got an amount of energy, and that is what is called the orbital energy or energy levels of the atoms. Electrons in an orbit possess energy of that particular orbit. That is what is called the discrete energy level. So the fifth orbit has got its own discrete level of energy. fourth orbit has got its own discrete level of energy. Third orbit has got its own discrete level of energy. So each level has its own discrete level of energy. Now, what is an energy band then? If large number of atoms are brought close to one another in a solid structure, of course, a large number of atoms will be brought together, one close to the other one, isn't it? They will be brought close to one another to form a solid or crystal. They begin to influence each other. When so many number of atoms are coming to close to each other, so there will be always having an influence of one atom with the other atom. So there will be always having an influence upon one atom with the nearby atom. As interatomic spacing decreases means that the space between one atom and the other atom. The space between one atom and the other atom. That is interatomic space. That decreases. What happens? The outer orbits will come close to overlap. So in that case, the outer orbit. What is the outer orbit? That is the valence band, isn't it? Or the orbit which comes under the valence band. So the outer orbit that will become close to overlap each other. Each electron can have a range of energies than a single or discrete energy. So in such a case, each electron can have a range of energies. So each atom has got its own level of energy, what is called energy levels. But whenever a large number of atoms put together in a solid structure or a crystalline structure, then what happens? Each atom will be having an influence upon the nearby atom. So that actually makes it to be having what? A range of energy. Then that range of energy is actually this range of energy is called the energy band in an atom structure. So there will be energy bands in the atom or the orbital structure. There will be energy bands. Then what is meant by valence band then? The electrons in the outermost orbit or outermost shell are called the valence electrons that we know very well. Range of energies possessed by a valence electrons is called valence band. So valence band means that is the band in which the valence electron possesses energy, or that is the energy possessed by the valence electrons in the band. That is what is called the valence band. That is the range of energy possessed by the valence electrons. That is the valence band. Then what is meant by conduction band then? So conduction band means valence electrons. What is the thing I told you? The valence electrons means that is electrons in the outermost shell, which are loosely bound usually. Which are loosely bound means that whenever you give an energy to such atoms. So whenever you give an energy to such atom, how can you give energy in the form of applying an electric field, or in the form of giving a light energy, or in the form of giving some kind of energy sources, isn't it? So in that way, you can give energy to such valence electrons. Such valence electrons which are loose, because these electrons are loosely bound to the nucleus, which can move through the solid, like free electrons, and are responsible for the conduction of current. And these valence electrons, which are loosely bound to the nucleus, can acquire energy and crosses the gap between the valence band and the band which is called the conduction band. Or the electrons can move from the valence band to the conduction band if it is possessing sufficient energy. How can you give energy? By giving an applied source of EMF, or by giving an electric field. That is applying a source of EMF, or applying an electric field, or by giving a light energy, like that. So this actually what happens to this valence electrons when it is subject to an electric field, because it possesses sufficient energy, so that it acquires sufficient energy to cross the gap between the valence band and the conduction band. And this gap between the valence band and conduction band is usually called the, what is that energy gap called? That is called the formidable gap. So that gap has got an energy, that is the forbidden gap energy. That's a forbidden energy gap. And this valence electrons, which are loosely bound to the nucleus, can move through the solid like free electrons and are responsible for the conduction of current. And once this valence band electrons crosses this gap between, that is forbidden gap, then it reaches to the conduction band, where it can freely move. Because these electrons are free electrons. When it reaches to the conduction band, these electrons are known as conduction band electrons or conduction electrons or electrons which are giving or which gives rise to the current flow in that particular material. The range of energies possessed by conduction electrons is called conduction band. While this electrons in the conduction band also has got some ranges of energy, and this ranges of energy is what is called the conduction band energy or conduction energy possessed by the conduction band. Okay, that is the conduction electrons which possess energy in the conduction band. So this is the forbidden gap. I told you, if you consider this y ordinate as energy and this as the atom's band structure, then this is the valence band, that is the outermost shell band, and this is the conduction band. So the electrons which are available, electrons is not shown here, but you can see that this valence band is filled with electrons. It is partially or fully filled with electrons, and whenever you give a source of energy to this particular valence band electrons, it acquires sufficient energy and crosses this gap, what is called the band gap, or that is what is called the forbidden gap, and which reaches at the conduction band. If it possesses sufficient energy to cross this gap, then it reaches at the conduction band and becomes a conduction band electron. And this conduction band electron has got a range of energy called the conduction band energy. And this band gap is called the forbidden gap, and which also possesses an energy in electron volt. We will come across all those things one by one. So the gap or separation between the valence band and conduction band is called the forbidden energy gap. Electrons can be taken from the valence band to the conduction band greater than Eg. If the conduction band energy, if the conduction band or the energy possessed by the valence electrons is greater than this Eg level. Eg means that is the band gap energy. If it possesses an energy which is more than this band gap energy, that is, if it is greater than Eg, is called the band gap energy. And then if it is more than band gap energy, this electrons can reach at the conduction band and becomes a conduction band electron and constitute a current depending upon the source of EMF applied to the system or to the conductor or the whatever that material. Understand? And Eg is expressed in electron volt. Usually the energy possessed by the electrons are usually represented with the that unit what is called electron volt, represented by small letter e, capital letter V. So Eg means that is the band gap energy that is expressed in electron volt. Okay. Now, depending upon the value of this band energy gap or the band gap between the conduction band and valence band, that is the forbidden energy gap, the materials or solids can be considered to be three groups. One is the conductors, second one is the semiconductors, and third one is the insulators. So you should have a knowledge about the conductors, semiconductors, and insulators. Our interest of discussion here is mainly the semiconductors. But we have to know a brief account of what is conductor, what is a conductor, or what is an insulator, or what is a semiconductor, that is in between the insulator and conductor. But you should not say, as a technology man, as a person who knows technology, you should not say it is a material between a conductor and insulator. No, that is a layman's answer. So you have to very specifically mention what is an inductor, insulator, what is a conductor, what is a semiconductor. Then we will see each one of these one now next session. So before that, we conclude here that this is the conduction band having a large number of energy levels, and this is the valence band having a large number of energy levels. And between these energy levels, we have forbidden gap. That is what is called the energy gap. So these are all the different levels, the level 1, number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 like that. So each levels are each orbital structures or orbits and which possess its own discrete level of energy, electron energy in electron volt. And the valence band electron has to cross this forbidden gap in order to become a conduction band electron, and so that there will be a conduction band energy in the conduction band. Okay. So now, what are insulators, conductors, and semiconductors? That is our interest is to discuss about semiconductors. But before that, you have to know what are insulators, what are conductors, and what are the basic features of semiconductors, or why we are very much interested in semiconductors and their properties. Okay. So, an insulator does not allow electric current to pass through them, which is a poor conductors of electricity. That is only a simple answer. An insulator does not conduct electricity. That's a simple answer. And here, in the case of insulator, which is filled with valence band, completely filled valence band, but it has got an empty conduction band. VB means valence band and CB means conduction band. Completely filled valence band. There will be completely filled valence band, but that valence band electrons cannot reach to the conduction band. What does it mean? If the valence electrons cannot reach to the conduction band, means that the band gap between the valence band and conduction band is very large in terms of the band gap energy. So in terms of band gap energy, if the band gap energy, that is the forbidden energy gap, is very large, that is more than 5 electron volts, more than 5 electron volts, such a large band gap is there. So such materials which has got a band gap energy of 5 electron volt or more, usually more than 5 electron volt, such materials comes under insulator. That is the real answer for an insulator when that particular question is asked to a technology man like you people. So you have to say that, of course, insulator does not allow electric current to pass through it, or insulator does not allow a current flow through it because it is a poor conductor of electricity. But why is it not conducting electricity? Because though its valence band is filled completely, but its conduction band is empty. Why is it empty? What is the reason for getting this conduction band empty? Because the conduction band and valence band has got a very large band gap distance, or it has got a very big or very large forbidden gap, and that gap is equal to or greater than usually 5 electron volts. So if such a very large band gap energy is there for a material, then such materials comes under insulator. Suppose what is an insulator? You have to specify, you have to explain, or you have to give an answer that if in a material, if the conduction band and valence band has got a very wide energy gap equal to or greater than 5 electron volts, then such type of materials comes under the insulators. So what is the behavior, what is the feature of this insulators? In the insulators, the valence band is filled completely, but at the same time, the conduction band is empty due to a very large band gap between the valence band and the conduction band. Okay. Even if large amount of energy is given or temperature is raised, electrons cannot jump from the valence band to the conduction band. For example, a glass piece or a plastic, which are considered to be a very high insulator, or a porcelain material, which has got a very high insulation resistance, or just got a very high insulation resistance. Somebody has come, I think, just 1 minute. I will just see who is come. Okay, just 1 minute. Just come. Just wait. Why they come always late? When we say about the time and very specifically we mention about the time, you have to come in time. Okay, okay then. Okay. Now, yeah, we have reached, isn't it? Okay. So that is why the glass is considered to be an insulator, or glass is an insulator, or plastic is an insulator, or a dry wooden piece is an insulator, because there the material band gap, that is gap between the valence band and conduction band, is having a very large band gap, which is of the order of 5 electron volt or more. In such materials, of course, the electrons cannot move from the valence band to the conduction band, or conduction band is almost empty. There is no free electrons available on the conduction band. Such materials are called insulators. But due to very severe temperature, of course, some of the electrons will be acquiring some energy and may cross the forbidden gap. In such cases, that particular material will be losing its insulation property, or we say that the insulators breaks down its insulation property. Okay, but under ordinary temperature and ordinary conditions and all, or ordinary amount of energy to the system or to give the material, it will not make any change in the material, because the material has got a very large band gap between the valence band and the conduction band. Now we come to the conductors. So conductors, the basic feature of conductor is that which allows the current flow through it very easily. Why is it allowing current flow through it? Because in a conductor, the valence band and conduction band it overlap each other. Or in other words, there is no effective forbidden gap between the conduction band and the valence band. Or valence band and conduction band overlap each other. It means that there is no forbidden gap. There is no forbidden energy to be circumvented to get the valence band electrons to the conduction band because it is already the valence band and conduction band which are overlapping each other. So there will be a large number of valence electrons that will be available at the conduction band when we give a potential source to the that conductor material. That is why the conductor material is allowing the flow of current through it because there will be a large number of free electrons in it, in the conduction band. Large number of free electrons are available in the conduction band. So conduction is due to these large number of free electrons. So such materials are called conductors. Now our interest is to semiconductors. What is the basic feature of semiconductor? The electrical conductivity lies between conductors and insulators. So in semiconductor material like silicon or germanium, silicon is represented by Si, germanium represented by G. So in silicon or germanium, such materials are usually considered to be semiconductor materials. So there are so many other semiconductor materials, but for the understanding and a major group of semiconductor materials are made up of either silicon or germanium. Of course, not germanium, mostly silicon. So such materials have got a conductivity that lies between the conductors and insulators. But that is not a good answer. For technical point of view or engineering point of view, this particular semiconductors have got a completely filled valence band, but empty conduction band under normal condition. Under normal temperature condition, the valence band is completely filled, but the conduction band is empty. But it is not considered to be an insulator, though the valence band is filled and the conduction band is empty. Why? Because in semiconductor materials like germanium or silicon, the forbidden gap between the valence band and the conduction band is of the order of 1.1 electron volt or more than 1 electron volt in meter, or it will be around 1 electron volt. So in the case of silicon, it is 0.7 electron volt. In the case of germanium, which comes under almost about 1.1 electron volt. Or if the forbidden gap energy is greater than or equal to 1.1 electron volt or around 1 electron volt, if it is more than 1 electron volt, we can consider such materials to be a semiconductor material. Or in semiconductor material, the valence band and the conduction band has got a band gap which is greater than or equal to 1 electron volt. 1 electron volt. At low temperature, that is at absolute 0 Kelvin, it is an insulator. At very low temperatures and under ordinary conditions, a semiconductor will be usually behaving just like an insulator. But as the temperature increases, because the forbidden gap is only 1.1 electron volt or 0.72 electron volt or so for germanium or silicon type insulators, semiconductors. So if the temperature is increased, if the temperature around is increased, some of the electrons in the valence band will be jumped it will be jumps and crosses to this forbidden gap and reaches at the conduction band. And such electrons are available to participate in the conduction process. So such type of materials which has got this particular feature. Now what is that feature? Under normal temperature condition or under ordinary temperature condition, low temperature like 0 degree Kelvin or so, absolute temperature 0 degree Kelvin or so, it will be behaving just like an insulator. It will not conduct electricity. But when the temperature in the surrounding media or the temperature of the material increases slightly above the absolute temperature or so, what happens, some of the valence band electrons which are loosely bound to the nucleus, that will be acquiring or possessing more and more energy, and there is a state at which it crosses the small band gap that is of the order of 1.1 electron volt or so. So that it crosses this forbidden gap and reaches at the conduction band and participates in the process of conduction. Such type of materials which behaves like this are called semiconductors. And we will be mainly concentrating on the semiconductors and what are all semiconductors and what are the main features of semiconductors, how semiconductors are classified like that. Okay. Now this shows the conductor, insulator and semiconductor. Here in the see, this is the band structure. Here this is the valence band electrons at the outermost shell, and this is the conduction band. When it becomes a conductor, here the valence band electrons and conduction band electrons overlap each other. So there is no effective band gap between the valence band and conduction band. Okay, for any material, this will be the band structure. But for good conducting material, the band structure will be having a band gap that is zero. Or in other words, we can say that the valence band and this is the valence band and this is the conduction which overlap each other. That is why it is called, it is shown as crosses. There are so many crosses like this. So which is having no effective forbidden gap. So here the valence band and conduction band overlap each other. So this becomes a very good conductor of electricity. So it's a good conductor. And by looking at this structure, so here the band gap is very large. Here this is the valence band and this is the conduction band. There is no electrons possibly crossing this one and reaches the conduction band. So the band gap will be almost equal to 5 electron volts or more. So here this is the band gap. This band gap is about say 1.1 electron volt or so. So whenever the surrounding temperature increases, the valence electrons here will be reaching at the conduction and participating in the process of conduction here when the temperature increases. And here this is the band gap, and this is the band gap is about 1.1 electron volts. So that is pictorially or diagrammatically shown here. So this is the forbidden gap shown here. This is the key. This is the allowed and empty. Allowed empty means the allowed valence band, conduction band like that. So this is allowed occupied. Already occupied valence band electrons like that. Okay. So this is completely filled like that. Okay. Now, in semiconductors, we have two types of semiconductors in general. That are all generally, or semiconductors are generally classified into intrinsic semiconductors and extrinsic semiconductors. What is an intrinsic semiconductor? An intrinsic semiconductor is a pure semiconductor. Pure semiconductor means if we consider about the atomic structure of a silicon or germanium, which has got the atomic structure, which has got, what is the atomic structure of silicon or germanium? Have you studied it in the secondary classes? At the outermost shell of a germanium or silicon material, there will be 4 outermost electrons, isn't it? There will be 4 outermost electrons that will be making in bond with the nearby electrons of the same material, isn't it? So in the solid silicon or germanium, the material will be having large number of atoms in it. So at the valence band, of course, these electrons which are close to each other will be always making bond with the nearby atom, isn't it? So in strictly speaking, this semiconductor material is an intrinsic semiconductor material because this semiconductor material is pure in its form. An intrinsic semiconductor is always pure in its form. Pure, semiconductor material. So in such materials, the outermost, in the case of a silicon or germanium, we have the outermost shell, that is the valence shell will be, or valence band will be having 4 outermost electrons. A semiconductor with there is a balance between the number of electrons and in the conduction band and the number of holes in the valence band is called the intrinsic semiconductor. In terms of the band structure, in terms of the electrons available in the band structure, that is electrons available in the valence band and conduction band. A semiconductor, there is a balance between the number of electrons in the conduction band. That is, whatever is the number of electrons in the conduction band and the number of holes in the valence band. How many number of electrons have been escaped from the valence band to the conduction band due to the application of an energy. That is what is called holes. We will come across all these things in the later session. What is a hole? What is electron like that? Okay. A semiconductor, there is a balance between the number of electrons in the conducting band and the number of holes in the valence band is called intrinsic semiconductor. So, an intrinsic semiconductor in its usual form is a pure semiconductor. It's a pure semiconductor. For example, silicon and germanium. Silicon is usually represented by Si, germanium is represented by Ge. Okay. Each atom has 4 electrons in the outermost orbit. That is the valence electrons. Because the outermost orbital electrons are called the valence electrons, and in germanium and silicon, 4 valence electrons are there in the outermost orbit. Each of the 4 valence electrons take part in forming the covalent bond with the 4 neighboring atoms. So these electrons in the outermost shell will be making a bond with other atoms of the same material, so that at the adjacent atoms there will be a bonding between the electrons available on the atom. Atom ഞാൻ പറഞ്ഞു കഴിഞ്ഞു, ന്യൂക്ലിയസ് ചുറ്റും എപ്പോഴും തന്നെ ഓർബിറ്റിൽ കൂടി electrons in revolve ചെയ്യുന്നുണ്ട്. Outermost orbit is having 4 electrons in the case of silicon and germanium, and these 4 electrons will be making a bond. The bond that will be connecting, or that will be having bonding with the other electrons in the same material, or other electrons in the atom of the material. Other material the nearby atom electrons whether bond ഉണ്ടാക്കും. That is why it is called bonds or covalent bonds, because here the bonding between the valence electrons are taking place. That is why it is called covalent bonds. Okay, so electrons will be making covalent bonds by having a bonding with the other electrons of the nearby atom. Okay, neighboring atom. 4 electrons due to their own, and the remaining due to the covalent bonds. So 4 electrons will be due to their own, and the other will be having covalent bond near neighboring atoms. Due to this, the outermost shell of the all atoms are completely filled. See, in pure intrinsic semiconductor, the outermost shells of all atoms are completely filled and stable. So, in the purest form of semiconductor, that is what is called the intrinsic semiconductor. In intrinsic semiconductor, the outermost shells of all atoms are completely filled in, and these atoms are stable in its normal condition. So at low temperature, such as absolute zero, all the valence electrons are tightly held by the parent atoms with covalent bonds, and hence they cannot move through the conduction band, or through the gap between the conduction band and the valence band. So under normal temperature conditions, or at low temperature conditions, or like absolute zero, or at absolute zero temperature, actually what happens, this covalent bonds which are tightly bound with each other, it cannot be separated. So that will be tightly bound with the nearby atoms with covalent bonds. Isn't it? Covalent bonds. When atoms bond together, in order to be stable and obtain octet configuration, you know what is an octet. So all the outermost shall be having a tendency to become an octet by combining the other 4 electrons of the outermost shells of the nearby atom. Isn't it? So that it will be forming an octet. And this formation of an octet causes the atomic structure of that material to be stable. So it will be stable. That is why these electrons cannot be dislodged. These electrons cannot be separated very easily. Or if at all we want to make the separation of these electrons, we have to apply certain, say, either temperature or by some means. You will come across all those things one by one. When atoms bond together, in order to be stable and obtain octet configuration, that is, in order to form the octet. Why it forms an octet? Because to make the system stable, to make the atomic structure stable in its normal condition. So in order to obtain octet, each atom shares 1 electron with the neighboring 4 atoms. So here, this is the silicon atom. This I will consider this one. See, this is silicon atom having 4 outermost shell electrons. And this electron in the silicon of same atom in the nearby here. So same nearby atom here. This will be also having 4 electrons. So these 2 electrons, which are close to each other, will be forming a covalent bond. These 2 electrons are forming covalent bond. These 2 electrons are forming covalent bond. These 2 electrons are forming covalent bond. Like that, each of the atoms of the material here will be forming its own covalent bond so as to produce an octet on its outermost shell, isn't it? So that it forms an octet configuration. 8 electrons in the valence shell or outermost shell. So that is that here you might have already learned, I think. This octet configuration makes this particular atom structure to be stable. That will be stable. Uniform 3D pattern is formed called crystalline structure. Actually, this formation of covalent bonds, and here it will be making covalent bonds like in this way also. Here, if you have 2-dimensionally, if you consider a 3-dimensional system, of course, it will be making, here there will be another 4 atoms that will be making covalent bonds with nearby atoms like this in the direction. Here, y direction, x direction, and the z direction also, it will be making covalent bonds. Okay. So that is why in uniform 3D pattern is formed called crystalline, and it will be forming a crystalline structure. If it is അപ്പോൾ ഇവിടെ ഇപ്പോൾ 2D കാണിച്ചിട്ടുള്ളൂ 2D structure crystalline 2D structure ആണ് 3D structure ആണെങ്കിൽ it will be having it will be forming covalent bonds like this. Okay, ഇവിടെ ഇങ്ങോട്ടേക്കുള്ള ഇവിടെ ഉണ്ടാകുന്ന ഇവിടെ ഇത് കാണിച്ചിട്ടില്ല. This is only a 2D representation of crystalline structure. Okay. Now up to absolute 0 degree Kelvin and at very low temperatures. Understand that the main point I have marked here. At absolute 0 degree Kelvin and at very low temperatures, valence electrons are tightly bound to the parent atom. No free electrons are available for conduction. Intrinsic semiconductors behave as insulators under 0 degree Kelvin absolute. Understand? So under very low temperatures, the semiconductor material will be behaving exactly like an insulator. That is the meaning of this? At very low temperature and absolute 0 degree Kelvin, the valence electrons are very tightly bound to its parent atom with covalent bonds, and there won't be effectively no free electrons available on the conduction band. So that is why intrinsic semiconductors behave as insulator under normal condition. Somebody else has come, I think, once again. Okay, wait. Why they are coming always late? I don't know. Why are you always coming late? Don't do like that, okay? Hereafter, I won't allow such cases. So, that I have told you now. And at room temperature, that is around 300 degree Kelvin. At room temperature, around 300 degree Kelvin or about 32 degrees centigrade, electrons gain sufficient thermal energy to break the covalent bond. So at room temperature means 27 to 32 degrees centigrade, about 27 to 30 degrees centigrade usually. So at room temperature, electrons gain sufficient thermal energy due to the thermal conditions of the surrounding medium. Electrons gain sufficient thermal energy to break the covalent bond. So the covalent bonds with the nearby atoms will be broken, and free electrons are now getting available. So free electrons are getting free. So free electrons are formed which participate in the conduction process, and conductivity increases. So in that case, the conductivity of the material increases. So under absolute 0 or with low temperature, the intrinsic semiconductor will be behaving exactly like an insulator. But at room temperature, some of the electrons gain sufficient thermal energy to break down the covalent bonds and getting free the electrons, and these free electrons will participate in the conduction process. Or in other words, we say that the conductivity of the intrinsic semiconductor increases with increase in temperature. So resistance of the semiconductor decreases with increase in temperature, indicating negative temperature coefficient of resistance. So what is negative temperature coefficient of resistance? Do you know what is negative temperature coefficient of resistance? Negative temperature coefficient of resistance means that whenever the temperature increases, the material resistance will get decreased. That is the negative temperature coefficient, or materials having negative temperature coefficient is having this kind of property. That is, whenever the temperature increases, resistance decreases. So the resistance of the semiconductor decreases with increase in temperature, which means that such materials are having negative temperature coefficient of resistance. So a semiconductor is always having a negative temperature coefficient of resistance. So these 3 points and the important sub points There are other important points that we have to note down very clearly. Okay. Now, what is the Hall, or what is the concept of Hall? So when covalent bonds break, or break here, see, let us consider the case of this figure. We have we have materials like this. So for this, for valence electrons, that will be making covalent bond with this one, isn't it? So here this will be making covalent bond with this one. But consider this particular material having. So here it is having say some of the, actually this is a material having 4 valence electrons on its outermost shell, isn't it? So when the temperature is increased, one of the covalent bonds made by all the electrons are made covalent bonds, isn't it? Here it is made covalent bond, here it is made covalent bond, here it is made covalent bond. But here, due to temperature increase of the material, one of the covalent bonds, let us consider this as an example. This covalent bond breaks. So what happens? Here it breaks means here this electrons will be getting free. So this electron from the valence band is getting freed and comes to the conduction band by crossing the energy gap. That is shown here, isn't it? So here, when it is coming from the valence band to the conduction, in the valence band it is in the covalent bond. But when it is coming to the conduction band, it is a free electron, creating a hole here. Because there is no electron here. So this electron vacancy is called a hole. The removal of an electron from a covalent bond creates vacancy called hole. So this is a hole. So in the valence band, when an electron is getting accelerated due to acquiring an energy, it comes to the conduction band and becoming a conduction electron. But at the same time, at the valence band, since the covalent bond is broken and the electrons have been reached to the conduction band, here it creates a hole, which creates a vacancy. Just like the meaning of hole, which makes a vacancy here. And that vacancy is called a hole. It's a hole. And this hole is having a positive charge. That also you should understand. Whenever, though the electrons have been reached to the conduction band here, but here it creates a hole. Actually, this particular charge which comes from negative to here, this particular conduction band, where this is an electron having negatively charged particle. But here it is creating a hole here, which possesses a positive charge. ഇവിടെ already bond structure ഉണ്ടായിരുന്നതാണ്. പക്ഷെ ഇതിന്റെ ബോണ്ടിങ് ഒഴിവാകാൻ കാരണം thermal energy കൂടുതൽ ഉണ്ടായതുകൊണ്ടാണ്. So surround media, the thermal energy is more and more. This electrons gets accelerated due to possessing the high thermal energy, and which comes to the conduction band. And this is now the conduction band electron, creating a hole here. Here this is a loss of electron here, and this loss of electron is characterized by a positive charge, or usually the hole is having a positive charge. That you should understand. The hole is having a positive charge. For every free electrons, a hole is created. So each breaking of the covalent bonds due to the thermal energy, because there is nothing done in this pure intrinsic semiconductor. It's a pure intrinsic semiconductor. The only thing is that we have increased the surrounding media temperature has been increased. That is the only thing happened. Due to that particular temperature increase, the covalent bonds will be gradually getting broken. So this is disrupted and broken. So what happens? The electrons will be getting freed as free electrons coming to the conduction band and becoming a conduction band electron, creating a hole here. So each valence band or each covalent bond here, a hole is created by taking the electrons in the valence band to the conduction band. That is why here it creates a hole here, and this hole effectively has a positive charge. This hole has effectively a positive charge. The electrons in the negative charge, but it creates a hole here by becoming a conduction band electron by crossing the energy gap. Okay. And here, what happens to this conduction band electrons? Of course, there will be large number of conduction band electrons coming like this due to the thermal energy posted by the electrons here, creating so many holes here. So these conduction band electrons, which actually forms or which recombines with the electrons here. So that is actually when it comes here, it becomes a free electron, isn't it? It becomes a free electron, and this free electrons are generated thermally because there is only the thermal generation which happens due to the increasing temperature of the surrounding media. So that is why these electrons are thermally generated electrons in the conduction band. Or conduction band will be having a large number of free electrons which are thermally generated because we didn't do any other thing. We didn't give any electric field, or we didn't give any kind of other source of energy to it. Only the surrounding energy or surrounding media temperature has been increased. That actually caused for this crossing of this electron from the valence band to the conduction band, creating a hole here. So this hole is a positively charged one, and this positively charged particle hole that is created due to the dislodging or the breaking of the covalent bonds. And since this thermal generation of this conduction band electrons are due to thermal generation, that is why it is called thermally generated electrons. And once these electrons are coming to the conduction band, these electrons are here are coming to the conduction band, these holes that will be always trying to make filled with, or that will be filled making to filled with another free electrons available on the valence band. Valence band will be having a loosely bound electrons available. In the very next electrons, there will be electrons that will be tried to fill into this into this electron where there is a hole created. And this combination of the nearby electrons upon the holes created is what is called the electron hole combination, or combination of electron hole combination, because this hole created will be recombined with the other electrons in the nearby atoms. So that is electron hole combination, electron hole pairs, or electron hole combination. And here this electron hole pair generation that is occurring due to the crossing of the valence band electrons to the conduction band. And since this is a free electron, a hole is created here. That is why this is a creation, or this is actually a generation of electron hole pairs. Here it is a hole is created or generated, and here electrons are generated because by crossing the conduction band. So that is why this is called electron hole pair generation. And here, when the hole is created here, and each of these holes will be always trying to make trying to combine with the nearby electrons, then we say that it's an electron hole pair combination, or there is a recombination of electron hole pairs. So there will be always an electron hole pair combination. These are all taking place simultaneously. When this electrons, sorry. Where is that particular thing? So, yeah, there is that particular thing has been. Here this one. So when these electrons come from the valence band to the conduction band, simultaneously a hole is created here, a conduction band electron is created here. So this is electron hole pair generation. When holes are created, there will be always a number of free electrons available here in the neighborhood atoms. So this neighborhood atoms will combine with these holes provided here, or holes generated here. So that is what is called the electron hole pair recombination. These terms are very important. Electron hole pair recombination, electron hole pair generation, then thermal generation of electron. Thermal generation of electrons is the free electrons which is available on the conduction band due to thermal energy, And this hole should be always with a positive charge. And these things you should understand. Now we will come to this. So free electrons will jump into another vacancy in the crystal, thus cancelling the hole present there at that instant. So when the free electrons of the nearby atom jumps into the holes created already due to the thermal energy, then what happens? That hole will be now filled with an electron, isn't it? So there is no hole present there now. So this hole will be now cancelled. So thus cancels the hole present there at that instant. So this is what is called electron hole recombination. So whenever a hole is created in the valence band, immediately the nearby electrons available on the atomic structure of the same material will be combining together with this hole so that it jumps into that particular hole and maintaining that particular electron hole. That or that hole will be now cancelled, or that hole will be now cancelled with the electrons which are jumped from that nearby atoms to that particular hole position. So immediately after the generation of a hole, a nearby electrons will be coming in place of that hole, and that will be cancelling that hole. And this particular process is called the electron hole recombination. I think you understood what is electron hole pair generation, what is meant by thermal generation of free electrons, and what is meant by electron hole recombination. These terms are very important. Unless you know this particular terms in a very elaborate way, you will be always feel trouble in understanding the further actions of this semiconductor materials and all those things. Okay. Now, so electrons move in a direction opposite to the applied electric field. Holes move in the direction of an electric field. I told you this electrons, a hole can be created or generated, or an electron can jump across the, across the forbidden gap only with the application of an external source of energy, either increasing the temperature by going on increasing temperature, or by giving an external electric field. Suppose if you give an electric field, electric field, then what happens? So there will be a current flow in the conduction band, isn't it? And that electrons move in a direction opposite to the applied electric field. The direction of the movement of electrons will be always opposite to the applied electric field. But the hole movement, the movement of holes will be in the direction of the electric field. So hole move in the direction of electric. Suppose if your electric field has got a direction like this, if you this is the material structure, and this is the direction of application of the electric field. This is the direction of application. See, this is the applied electric field, and here from the valence band, the electrons will be jumping to the conduction. Conduction band. So this valence band electrons dislodging its bonding structure and comes to the conduction band by crossing the narrow bandwidth gap. So this is the energy level diagram. So what happens here? Hole will be created, and here the thermally generated electrons will be there. Suppose if you apply an electric field, there also again the not thermally. Here applied field is electric applied field. If you apply a source of EMF, then what happens? Here this electrons will be getting energized due to the application of this electric field, so that it will be getting sufficient energy to come to the conduction band. And here this electrons will be moving depending upon the applied field. So with the application of this applied field towards this direction, the conduction of the electrons in the conduction band will be in the opposite direction. So this is the movement of electrons in the material in the conduction band when an applied electric field is having a direction like this. But at the same time, what will be the movement of holes created here? The movement of holes will be, because each time one electron, this one will be coming and filled here and creating a hole here. And here this will be coming here and creating a hole here. So movement of hole will be from left to right if the applied voltage is from left to right. So the movement of the hole will be very similar to that of the applied field, and movement of electrons will be opposite to the applied electric field. I think you understood this concept, isn't it? Did you understand this concept? How the holes will be moving from or moving in the same direction of that of the applied electric field, and electrons in the opposite direction? This figure very clearly represents this one, because whenever a hole is created here with the positive charge, immediately the nearby atoms will be filling this one, so that this hole here it will be creating a hole here. So previously the hole was here, now it is here. Now again the nearby atom will be filling this one, and the hole is here. So effectively the hole creation will be towards this direction. That is the same direction as that of the applied electric field. But what about the electrons? Electrons will be moving through this one, and that will be moving against the applied electric field. This is the applied electric field direction. Here this is the movement of electron. Okay, so this is the conduction band, this is the forbidden gap, and this is the valence band. That is given for holes, electrons, and all those things are shown here. Okay. Now, in an intrinsic semiconductor, you have to understand this one. In an intrinsic semiconductor, that is the purest semiconductor, number of electrons, that is free electrons, will be exactly equal to number of holes. In an intrinsic semiconductor, number of free electrons will be exactly equal to number of holes. That we have seen here. How many number of electrons are just moved across this hole when they are creating holes. Whatever number of electrons are jumped through this one and creating a conduction here, that much number of holes will be created here. So number of electrons and number of holes will be the same. That is what is given here. Number of free electrons, that is the electrons which are getting free due to the application of electric field or thermal energy. So number of electrons are equal to number of holes. The number of electrons and number of holes will be equal. Electrons in conduction band and holes in the valence band contribute to the conduction of current. So which actually constitute the current flow? The current flow is constituted by the free electrons in the material of the semiconductor material. So the semiconductor material, the electrons actually constitute the current flow, and of course, when the electrons are giving a current flow in the conduction band, at the same time, the holes will be also moving, isn't it? So the actual current conduction is mainly due to the conduction band and holes in the valence band. Conduction band electrons free ആകുന്ന electrons valence band generate ചെയ്യുന്ന holes ആണ് യഥാർത്ഥമായിട്ട് ഉണ്ടാക്കുന്നത് electric current flow intrinsic semiconductor materials. Now I think you understood the very fact of an intrinsic semiconductor and its basic feature, behavior and all those things. Okay, and how it behaves when thermal energy is released or when it is applied or when it is subjected to a applied electric field. Okay. Now, extrinsic semiconductors. So I told you the semiconductors can be broadly classified into intrinsic semiconductors and extrinsic semiconductors, and in which intrinsic semiconductor is the purest form. Then what is an extrinsic semiconductor? Extrinsic semiconductors are formed by adding impurities to the intrinsic semiconductor. So if you add some impurities such as arsenic or antimony or gallium, such type of materials. Such type of materials are having some basic features which has got the outermost shell of its atomic structure with 5 valence electrons in the case of arsenic, and antimony also. Or in the case of arsenic, there will be 3 valence electrons in the outermost shell. So these or gallium, in which there will be that number of valence electrons on the outermost shell will be either 3 or 5. If it is a 3, it is called a trivalent impurity. If it is a 5 outermost shell at electrons, then it is called the pentavalent impurity. So in pentavalent impurity, the atomic structure will be having the material, that is impurity material, in which the outermost shell will be having 5 valence electrons. In the case of impurity material, which is having 3 outermost shells, 3 outermost electrons in the shells. Outermost shell will be having 3 electrons, that is valence electrons. The outermost shell will be having 3 valence electrons. Then such type of impurities are called trivalent impurities. Okay. So basically, the extrinsic semiconductors are made. Intrinsic semiconductors, intrinsic pure form intrinsic semiconductors. But extrinsic semiconductors are actually really made. That is impure semiconductors, or we add impurities to the intrinsic semiconductor in order to make it as an extrinsic semiconductor. So this extrinsic semiconductors are formed by addition of impurities into the intrinsic semiconductor, and this process is called doping. So with the doping, any intrinsic semiconductor can be converted into or made as an extrinsic semiconductor. And this process of adding impurities to intrinsic semiconductor in order to make it as an extrinsic semiconductor is called the process of doping. So with the doping, any intrinsic semiconductor can be made into an extrinsic one by suitably adding impurities to it. What are the impurities? Impurities can be either a trivalent impurity or an impurity material like antimony or so, in which the outermost shell will be having 3 outermost electrons in the outermost shell, 3 outermost electrons or 3 electrons on its outermost shell, or it can be, the impurity can be a pentavalent impurity in which there will be 5 electrons in the outermost shells. Okay, 5 electrons in the outermost shells. Such materials are called pentavalent impurity material. Okay, such pentavalent impurity materials, while it is doping with the intrinsic semiconductor, then that semiconductor material becoming an extrinsic semiconductor material. Again, extrinsic semiconductor has got a classification that we will see after this discussion. Okay. So this is actually it's extrinsic semiconductors are formed by addition of impurities into intrinsic semiconductors with the process called the doping. To increase the conductivity of the semiconductor, this doping is done. Why doping is done? Why doping is done? The doping is done not to make it impure intrinsic semiconductor. No. These impurities are added to an intrinsic semiconductor in order to make it as an extrinsic semiconductor. Why we add impurities to the intrinsic semiconductor? Because to make that intrinsic semiconductor conducting, or in order to increase the conductivity of the intrinsic semiconductor. I told you, in the intrinsic semiconductor in its purest form, it will not conduct electricity, which is a pure insulator under absolute temperature or very low temperatures. Absolute zero or very low temperatures. So under that condition, it will be exactly behaving like an insulator. But if you add some impurities, whether it is a trivalent impurity or a pentavalent impurity, not tetravalent. Pentavalent impurity. Tetravalent is actually silicon and germanium. Tetravalent means 4 valent electrons. So semiconductor materials like the intrinsic semiconductor material like silicon or germanium, which has got 4 outermost shells. And to that particular intrinsic material, if you add a trivalent material, say a gallium arsenide or arsenic or so, what happens? If the impurity is a pentavalent material, then what happens? All the 4 valence band electrons in the material will be making covalent bond with the intrinsic semiconductor, isn't it? But it actually makes an electron in excess or free. So for electrons in the outermost shell of the impurity will be making covalent bond with the outermost shell of the intrinsic material. But one electron will be getting free, or one electron will not be having a covalent bond with any other electrons like that. So this impurity will be giving, which gives the free electrons in the material. So if the impurities are added in such a manner, there will be a large number of such free electrons available in the material. Then you can have a material with large number of free electrons available in order to get a conduction of electric current. So in such materials where the concentration of electrons are more due to the addition of impurity in the intrinsic semiconductor, then such materials will be having more number of free electrons available. Such type of materials which has got large number of free electrons available are called N-type material. N means negative because electrons are having negatively charged. So such type of extrinsic material which has been added with an impurity of pentavalent or so. So what happens, in silicon material, intrinsic semiconductor, there will be 4 electrons on its outermost shell. That is the valence band electrons are 4 in the outer shell. And these 4 electrons will be making covalent bond with the intrinsic semiconductor, impurity material, that is a pentavalent one. The 4 electrons in the pentavalent impurity will be making covalent bond with the 4 electrons in the 4 valence electrons in the intrinsic semiconductor, giving rise to a electron getting free. So likewise, a large number of impurities are added with this material, intrinsic material, making a large number of free electrons available in the material. Then that particular material will be having a concentration of electrons having negative charge. That is why the extrinsic semiconductor, which has got a concentration of n negatively charged electrons, which actually constitute the current flow in the material, is called an N-type extrinsic semiconductor or N-type semiconductor in general. നമ്മൾ N-type semiconductor എന്ന് പറഞ്ഞാലും N-type extrinsic semiconductor എന്ന് പറഞ്ഞാലും അതിന്റെ meaning ഒന്നും, in which the current carrier is electrons, because that particular material is having a large number of electrons in it for the conduction of current. Okay, so extrinsic semiconductor, I told you there are two types of impurities. One is the pentavalent type impurities, that is impurity atoms with 5 valence electrons, and that increases the number of free electrons. And a trivalent impurity, what happens to a trivalent impurity? In a material like silicon or germanium, in which there are 4 valence electrons, this 4 valence electrons will be trying to make bonding with the impurity atoms. If the impurity atom is a trivalent impurity, then what happens? All the 3 valence electrons on the outermost shell of the impurity will be making covalent bond with the intrinsic semiconductor material, isn't it? So the valence electrons of the intrinsic semiconductor will be making covalent bond with the intrinsic impurity material, giving rise to a free electron, isn't it? It's actually not an electron. There will be an electron which will be available there, because 3 valence band electrons are making that. Actually, the fourth one electron requires another electrons to make a covalent bond. So there is no such electrons available. Or in other words, in the intrinsic semiconductor material, while it is added with an impurity of trivalent nature, what happens? In effect, the 3 valence band electrons in the intrinsic semiconductor will be making covalent bond with the 3 valence band electrons of the impurity, and the fourth electron will be acted as a hole, or which will be acted as a hole, because it has no other electrons to make covalent bond with the impurity atoms. Because impurity atom is trivalent only, the fourth electron cannot make a covalent bond with the impurity atom. So it creates a hole. So in other words, it creates a large number of such holes in the intrinsic semiconductor material by adding the trivalent impurity. Or when a trivalent impurity added with this intrinsic semiconductor material, which creates a large number of holes where the current conduction is mainly due to the creation of these holes. Or in other words, the current carrier in such materials are holes, or the material which has a current carrier as holes is usually called P-type material. P means positive. That is because the hole possesses positive charge only. So that is why it's a P-type material. So N-type material we knew, P-type material we know in extrinsic semiconductors. When we say extrinsic semiconductor, it can be either N-type or P-type. So extrinsic semiconductor can be either N-type having large number of free electrons for the current conduction, or a P-type in which the current carrier will be, or carrier of the current will be the holes. Okay, and in such materials, the impurity added to the trivalent material like silicon or germanium will be usually a trivalent impurity. That you should understand. അപ്പോൾ ഇലക്ട്രോൺസിന് കൂടുതൽ ഉണ്ടാക്കുന്ന ഇലക്ട്രോൺസ് കൂടുതൽ അബണ്ടൻസ് ആയിട്ട് ഇലക്ട്രോൺസ് ക്രിയേറ്റ് ചെയ്യുന്ന ഏത് ടൈപ്പ് ഇമ്പ്യൂരിറ്റി ആഡ് ചെയ്യുമ്പോഴാണ് when you apply a pentavalent impurity to the tetravalent silicon or germanium. Tetravalent means 4 valence electrons in the outermost shell. That is silicon or germanium. That is the intrinsic semiconductor material only. So if you add a pentavalent impurity material to the tetravalent silicon or germanium, then all the 4 valence electrons will be making recombinant or making covalent bond with each other, creating an electron that is in excess. So that excess electrons will be available to the conduction band. So that the current conduction or the carrier of the current will be the electrons, which is negative charge. That is why it is called N-type semiconductor material. Now, if a tetravalent semiconductor material, that is intrinsic semiconductor material, silicon or germanium, is added with a trivalent impurity. The trivalent impurity is having 3 valence electrons that will be making covalent bond with the outermost shell of the intrinsic semiconductor atom, and which makes which creates a hole in the intrinsic semiconductor. And such creation of holes will be more and more if more number of impurities are added to the atomic structure of the material. So what happens? More number of holes will be generated, and effectively the current carriers in the material will be holes. So such type of materials are called P-type semiconductor materials. Okay, P signifies the positive. That is P-type. Now, according to the type of impurity added, the extrinsic semiconductor, which can be either n-type or p-type. And n-type means the doping with the intrinsic semiconductor will be with a pentavalent atom or pentavalent material having pentavalent atom, or extrinsic semiconductor with p-type, in which the doping will be done with a trivalent impurity or atom or trivalent atom. This also you should understand. Okay, this is a simple diagrammatic representation for an extrinsic semiconductor in which there will be n-type and p-type. N-type or p-type the n-type or p-type semiconductors are only in extrinsic semiconductors, not in intrinsic, because intrinsic is always the purest form. Extrinsic means the intrinsic semiconductors are added with impurities like pentavalent impurity or trivalent impurity in order to make it as an extrinsic semiconductor for conduction purpose, in order to improve the conductivity. So extrinsic semiconductor can be either n-type or p-type, and n-type depends on the doping with pentavalent atom, p-type depends on the doping with trivalent atom. Okay. Now, what is an n-type semiconductor? I told you, doping of pure semiconductor with pentavalent atoms like phosphorus, arsenic, or antimony. Arsenic, antimony, phosphorus, these are all having the outermost shell with pentavalent, or there will be 5 valence electrons at the on the outermost shell. An impurity material like phosphorus, arsenic, or antimony, these materials are having 5 valence electrons on its outermost shell. So when this impurity of antimony or arsenic or phosphorus material are added with the intrinsic semiconductor material such as silicon or germanium, we can have n-type extrinsic semiconductor or n-type semiconductor material. So here 4 valence electrons of impurity atom can form covalent bond with the 4 neighboring silicon or germanium atoms. The fifth electron is getting freed, which cannot form a bond. That is why it is called free electrons. So this free electron is the carrier of current in the material. Each pentavalent impurity atom will donate an electron to conduction band at room temperature. Under ordinary temperature, that is the room temperature, each atom will donate an electron. Each atom will donate an electron. So if you are having a large number of atoms which are added to this intrinsic semiconductor material atom, then it will be creating a large number of free electrons. So this here this impurity is actually a donor of electrons. So that is why this kind of impurities, that is phosphorus, arsenic, antimony, are said to be donor impurities. In donor impurities, which gives electrons to make covalent bonds with the material, and in order to give rise to a free electron due to the formation of covalent bonds. So this is actually donating an electron. That's why it is called a donor impurity. So with the addition of these impurities, with the addition of impurities to the atomic structure of the intrinsic semiconductor, which donates an electron for each impurity addition of an atom. So each atom impurity addition of an atom will donate an electron. That's why it is called a donor impurity atom, or donor impurity material. Donor impurity atom is donor impurity material. So this material will be donating an electron for the conduction of current. After donating an electron, this impurity atom, that is this impurity, that becomes a positively charged ion. Once this electron is donated, what you know, a particular recombination takes place. I told you an electron hole pair recombination is taking place. Immediately a hole is generated that will be recombined with the nearby atom in order to form an electron hole pair recombination, and it becomes a positively charged ion band. After donating of free electrons in the conduction band, after donating of free electrons on the conduction band, what happens, you know, this electron hole will be having a pair, there will be a recombination in the valence band, and which creates which makes a, or which becomes a positively charged ion, and that ion is what is called the donor ion, because which actually donates an electron to the conduction band in order to make conduction to the extrinsic semiconductor. Okay, and due to that particular process, this particular electron hole pair recombination takes place on the valence band, so that particular recombination causes to produce positively charged ions. So each donation of an electron, the impurity atom of the impurity atom, that creates a positively charged ion in the material, and that is why such type of ions are called donor ions, because it donates one electron to the conduction. Okay, that is the idea. So this is explained here in the entire semiconductor material. So here, this is the impurity atom having 5 electrons on its outermost shell, and these are all 4 electrons, that is tetravalent type of tetravalent type of material, that is either silicon or germanium. So this tetravalent material, suppose let us consider the case of this germanium added to this, this antimony or arsenic, or what are the materials we have seen, the pentavalent materials? What are the materials? Phosphorus, arsenic, and antimony. Thus, materials you should not confuse. Phosphorus, that is a 5 valence electrons on its outermost shell. Arsenic also have 4 valence electrons, 5 valence electrons on its outermost shell. Then antimony also has 5 valence electrons on its outermost shell. Since it has got 5 electrons on the outermost shell, that is the valence electrons, that is why it is called pentavalent. Penta means 5. Pentagon, penta means 5. So pentavalent materials. Okay. So here we have seen this is a pentavalent material, that is antimony or arsenic. Just got 5 valence electrons. So each of the 4 electrons will be making covalent bond with the nearby electrons. So this makes a covalent bond. Here it makes a covalent bond. Here it makes a covalent bond. And here it makes a covalent bond. And these electrons are donated by this impurity atom. So this one electron is donated. So immediately when here this electrons have not other electrons here to combine each other. So this is getting freed and made available to the conduction band. This is made available to the conduction band. So this is made available to the conduction. Once it is going to the conduction band, the holes created on the valence band will be getting filled with the nearby atom electrons, and that is what is called the recombination of electrons, and that actually makes an electron electron hole pair, that produces a ion. That is what we have seen here, a positively charged ion here, because which creates a hole here when it donates an electron to the conduction band. So that becomes a positively charged ion, and that particular ion is called donor ion. So that is explained here in this case. So this is a silicon ion. These are all silicon ions having electrons having covalent bonds like this, and this is the antimony or arsenic having 5 valence electrons that makes the covalent bond this one, and this is getting free. So this is the pentavalent impurity arsenic, antimony or phosphorus. Okay, I think you got the idea now. Okay. Now, in addition to the electrons donated by impurity atom, thermal generation of electron hole pairs takes place. In addition to the electrons donated by impurity atom, so with the addition of impurity, of course, electrons are donated to the conduction band. At the same time, due to the thermal generation, why thermal generation is taking place? Because when the surrounding media temperature is increased, there will be always electron hole pair generation, and there will be an electron hole pair recombination also. So thermal generation also, there will be electron hole pair takes place. So the number of electrons will be greater than number of holes. In this case, because here the impurities are added and more number of electrons are donated by the impurity atoms, and in this case, the number of electrons will be always greater than number of holes. What will be the number of holes created due to the donation of electrons to the impurity atom? The number of atoms available on the conduction band will be more than that of the number of holes available on the intrinsic conductor material, while it is becoming an extrinsic material. And here the number of electrons are more. So since the number of electrons are more means the majority carriers, the carrier which constitute the current flow, that is what is called the majority carriers. Majority carriers means carrier, that is the current carrier which constitute a current flow in the conductor material. And this current carrier here will be the electrons, because more number of electrons are available on the conduction band due to the addition of a pentavalent impurity. So since electrons are majority carriers, then which will be the minority carriers? The minority carriers will be always the holes. So majority carriers will be electrons, because number of electrons will be more than the holes that constitute the electron, that will constitute the current flow, and the minority carriers, that will be holes, that will be always be the holes. And this majority carriers that constitute the current flow in the circuit, and majority carriers are considered to be the electrons in the constituting the current flow, and minority carriers are holes. That also you can understand with this diagram. See here, this is the donor ion, positive charge donor ion. I told you, due to the impurities added, trivalent impurities added, each donor ion is positive charge, that is made as positive here, and these are all the free electrons. These are all the free electrons made available on the conduction band. And whenever electrons are getting freed, so there will be holes created, and these holes, these are all actually the holes created on the valence band condition, valence band. And these electrons will be getting close to the conduction band through the forbidden band. That is shown here. And this is a hole that is also represented here. Now, what are p-type semiconductor material? Very similar to the n-type material. Here, in p-type semiconductor material, we add a trivalent impurity. In the case of n-type material, we added pentavalent type of impurity. In the case of p-type material, or in the case of p-type semiconductor material, that is p-type extrinsic semiconductor material, the doping of the pure semiconductor is with trivalent like boron, gallium. So boron and gallium are having trivalent impurities, or trivalent impurities means in the outermost shell of the impurity atom, or in the outermost shell of the atom of this impurity, there will be 3 valence electrons. And where the trivalent impurities are added, to a tetravalent silicon or germanium, which are considered to be the intrinsic semiconductors. So tetravalent silicon or germanium, that are considered to be the purest form of semiconductors, in which a trivalent impurity like boron or gallium is added. Then what happens? 3 valence electrons of the impurity atom can form covalent bonds with the 3 neighboring silicon or germanium atoms. The silicon or germanium atoms are tetravalent impurities having 4, not impurities, the pure semiconductors. The silicon or germanium are tetravalent intrinsic semiconductors, right? Tetravalent intrinsic semiconductors. So such intrinsic semiconductors are in its purest form. So that tetravalent semiconductor materials are now added with this trivalent impurities. What happens, the 3 outermost shell electrons of the trivalent impurity will be making covalent bond with the 3 electrons of the outermost shell of the intrinsic semiconductor. So the 3 covalent bonds are there. But in the intrinsic semiconductor, the 4th electron has no covalent form, because it is having no other electrons available on the intrinsic semiconductor, because it is a trivalent impurity semiconductor material. It is a trivalent impurity material. Trivalent impurity material. So the 4th bond of the intrinsic semiconductor is incomplete, because the 4th electron has no covalent bond with the electrons which are not available in the impurity, because it has got only 3 valence band electrons. So which results a vacancy in the intrinsic semiconductor. And this vacancy is called the hole. And this hole is the current carrier in the case of a p-type semiconductor. So each trivalent atom will leave a hole which can be occupied an electron in valence band. Understand this point. Each trivalent impurity will be creating a hole which can be occupied an electron in the valence band. And whenever I told you, whenever a hole is created in the valence band, immediately the nearby electrons of the atom will be coming and occupying the space of the hole. And that's what's called the electron hole pair recombination, or electron hole recombination, that takes place in the valence band. So the trivalent atoms which actually creates holes, and the trivalent atom accepts electrons from the neighboring atoms to complete a covalent bond. So it is an acceptor impurity. Why is it called an acceptor impurity? Because this impurity, when it is added with the intrinsic semiconductor, the three outermost shell of the impurity will be making covalent bond with the three outermost shell of the intrinsic semiconductor. But in the semiconductor, there is a vacancy of, there is an electron which has no covalent bond with the impurity. So it will be created as a vacancy, and that vacancy is what is called the hole. And that actually makes the conduction of current in the material, or the current carries the hole. And this trivalent atom accepts an electron from the neighboring atom. Actually, what happens? The trivalent atom accepts the electrons of the intrinsic semiconductor in order to form a covalent bond, to make the covalent bond structure. So it's an acceptor impurity. It's an acceptor impurity. That is why after accepting the electrons, the impurity atom becomes a negatively charged ion. So after accepting the electrons from the intrinsic semiconductor, it becomes, the impurity atom becomes a negatively charged ion called acceptor ion. So in the case of pentavalent impurity added to the intrinsic semiconductor material, the ions are said to be positively charged ions, and they are considered to be the donor atoms or donor ions. In the case of an impurity atom which accepts electrons from the intrinsic semiconductor in order to form a covalent bond, so that it becomes a negatively charged ion. So such type of ions are called acceptor ion, or such type of impurities are called acceptor impurities. So this negatively charged ion is called an acceptor ion. Understand? So that is the p-type semiconductor material. So here it has been diagrammatically explained here. See here, this is the tetravalent material having 4 valence electrons, silicon or germanium, and this is a trivalent impurity like boron, gallium, boron or gallium. Okay, so having 3 valence electrons. So here there are 3 valence electrons that will be making covalent bond to nearby atoms like this. So this is the tetravalent and this is the trivalent. All the 3 valence electrons will be making covalent bond with the neighborhood of the, or nearby tetravalent atoms of the intrinsic semiconductor. But in the impurity atom, of course, there is no covalent bond formed by this 4th electron of the tetravalent material, or there is no covalent bond formed here. So here it creates a hole. It creates a hole, and this hole will be recombined with another electrons in the valence band and recombined together, known as electron hole pair recombination. But this hole will be getting generated, and that hole will be creating the current flow in the cell. So that is why in p-type material, large number of holes are generated. Holes means positively charged. So the charge or charge carriers of the p-type materials are always holes or positively charged holes. And ions formed by this one, this particular impurity atom is a negatively charged ion. Negatively charged ion. Why? Because while it is accepting an electron from here, actually it creates a hole here and getting balanced and becoming this one as a negatively charged ion. Becoming this as a negatively charged ion. Okay. So, and this particular impurity which accepts the electrons of the intrinsic semiconductor, and that's why this particular impurity is called an acceptor impurity, which give rise to holes, that is generation of holes in the material. In addition to holes donated by the impurity atom, thermal generation of electron hole pairs also takes place. In p-type material also, there will be thermal generation of electron hole pairs. So naturally what happens, the number of holes in the p-type material will be always greater than the number of electrons. That you should understand first. In the case of n-type semiconductor material, number of electrons will be more than that of the number of holes generated. So it is having an abundance of, or it is having an abundance of n type or number of electrons getting freed and available at the conduction band. So the current carrier is the negatively charged electrons. So the majority carriers are electrons and the minority carriers are holes in the case of n-type material. But in the case of p-type material, where the number of holes generated are greater than the number of electrons. So the holes are said to be, or considered to be, or holes are the majority carriers of the current, and the electrons which are less than that of the holes are the minority carriers. That is shown here, the majority carriers and minority carriers. So free electrons are here. Here, large number of holes are provided. It's a large number of holes, so that each atom, the recombination of this one, each atom becomes a negatively charged ion. That is a p-type material. In the case of p-type material, it becomes a negatively charged ion once it is giving out the holes. ഹോളിനെ പുറത്തേക്ക് വിട്ടു കൊടുക്കുന്നതോടുകൂടി തന്നെ ഇത് negatively charged ion ആയിട്ട് മാറുന്നു. Okay, and that's why this is called an acceptor ion, which gives out number of holes, and that constitutes the current carrier in the material. And majority carriers are holes, and the minority carriers, that is shown here only smaller number, 1, 2, 3 only shown here. All others are holes. So current carriers are majority carriers of the current is hole, and minority carriers are the electron. That is shown here. Okay, the case of p-type material. Now, this table gives a brief account of these two semiconductor materials, that is intrinsic semiconductor material and extrinsic semiconductor material. It is a pure, intrinsic semiconductor is a pure group for elements, that is silicon or germanium. Conductivity is less under normal condition, or it becomes it acts as a insulator. The conductivity increases with rising temperature of the surrounding medium. The number of free electrons is equal to the number of holes in the case of pure semiconductor, that is intrinsic semiconductor. Number of electrons of free electrons will be equal to number of holes generated. Or number of free electrons is actually equal to the number of holes generated. That is the case of intrinsic semiconductor. But what about the extrinsic semiconductor? Very similar to the intrinsic semiconductor. Here we are adding impurity. So group 3 or group 5 elements are introduced in the group 4 elements. Here this is the purest form. Here this is an impure form in which group 3 element having tetravalent impurity. Group 5 element that is having pentavalent impurity. That are added to what type of material? An intrinsic type of material having tetravalent material. Tetravalent material means silicon or germanium. Then, due to this addition of the impurities, what happens? The conductivity increases. Then conductivity mainly depends on the amount of impurity added, whether it is pentavalent or tetravalent. So if it is pentavalent means the conductivity mainly depends on what? Mainly depends on electrons, isn't it? Pentavalent means more number of electrons are generated. So conductivity is mainly due to electrons. And if it is a trivalent impurity added, then the conductivity is mainly due to the number of holes generated. And number of free electrons are not equal to the number of holes in the case of extrinsic semiconductor. These are all the general aspects you have to understand about the intrinsic semiconductor and extrinsic semiconductor. Okay. Now, difference between n-type and p-type semiconductors. Of course, what I have explained all these things by now, but just see, suppose if you're asked to write down some of the difference between n-type and p-type material, you have to write down like this. N-type semiconductor material is an extensive semiconductor material which is obtained by doping the impurity of pentavalent type, such as antimony, phosphorus, arsenic, etc., to a pure germanium or silicon semiconductor, which are essentially tetravalent material. Pure germanium or silicon are tetravalent material, having 4 valence electrons. And what about p-type material? It is that is also an extrinsic semiconductor, which is obtained by doping trivalent impurity. N-type semiconductor, that is N-type is an extrinsic semiconductor by adding pentavalent impurity, and p-type is an extrinsic semiconductor by adding trivalent impurity such as boron, gallium, indium, etc. Boron or gallium or indium to the pure germanium or silicon semiconductor. Then the impurity atoms added provide extra electrons in the structure and are called the donor atoms. Impurity atoms which adds extra electrons for concentration of more electrons. So that's why it is called N-type. So it increases the number of electrons in the structure and are called donor atoms. And the impurity atoms in the case of a P-type material, that is a trivalent impurity, which create vacancies of electrons, that is holes. Vacancies of electrons means more number of holes are created, and isn't it? So vacancies of which create vacancies of electrons means more number of holes are created in the structure, and the current carrier is due to the hole, or majority carrier of the current is due to hole, and this is called the acceptor atom. And the case of N-type semiconductor material, the electrons are the majority carriers and holes are the minority carriers. And in the case of P-type semiconductor, holes are the majority carriers and electrons are the minority carriers. Okay, so with this one, I conclude the session on semiconductor intrinsic and extrinsic, and we will see a brief account of PN junction also now. Okay, so this is about the intrinsic semiconductor and extrinsic semiconductor.